Saving a lion cub. What the pride did next shocked everyone. The murky waters of the Mara River pounded against David Thompson's chest as he struggled against the current. A drowning lion cub clung desperately to his shoulders. Just minutes earlier, 34-year-old wildlife photographer David had been setting up his equipment on the riverbank when he witnessed something that would change his life forever. A tiny cub slipping into the swollen river, carried away by flash flood waters that had surged overnight due to torrential rains upstream. David had been documenting wildlife in Kenya's Masai Mara Reserve for 8 years, and not once had he broken the cardinal rule of nature photography: never interfere with natural processes. Until now, the cub, no more than 4 months old, had been playing too close to the water's edge when the soft earth gave way beneath its paws. Its frightened cries as the powerful current swept it downstream pierced through David's professional detachment. Without hesitation, he dropped his camera and dove into the dangerous river. "I just couldn't watch him drown," David later told investigators. "All my human instincts overpowered my training as a wildlife photographer." The rescue nearly cost him his life. The Mara River during flood season is treacherous, full of hidden debris and unpredictable currents that have claimed countless animal lives, and a few human ones too. As David reached for the struggling cub, a submerged log slammed into his left shoulder, nearly knocking him unconscious. Only his determination to save the young lion kept him focused. At last, he managed to grab hold of the exhausted animal. The cub, weak from the river water it had swallowed and shaken from trauma, instantly wrapped its tiny paws around David's neck and held on with surprising strength. David could feel the creature's tiny heart pounding rapidly against his chest as he began the perilous journey back to shore, fighting the current that seemed intent on dragging them both downstream toward crocodile-infested pools. What David didn't realize as he slogged through the muddy waters was that he was being watched. From the riverbank, hidden among the acacias, 5 adult lionesses observed the cries of their missing cub. The pride had been frantically tracking its scent to the water's edge, just in time to witness David's rescue attempt. When David finally reached the shallows, gasping and exhausted, he looked up, and his blood ran cold. The entire pride was there, not just the 5 lionesses, but also a massive dark-maned male. They stood motionless in a half-circle near the water's edge, their amber eyes fixed on David and the cub in his arms. David's mind raced. He had no options. Chest deep in water, holding a lion cub and facing 6 fully grown lions. Any sudden move could provoke an attack, one that would end his life in seconds. The largest lioness, undoubtedly the matriarch, stepped forward. David held his breath, expecting the worst. Lions fiercely protect their young, and here was a stranger cradling one of their own. Everything David knew about lion behavior told him this moment would end in tragedy. But then, something extraordinary happened. Something that defied everything scientists thought they knew about lion cognition and social behavior. In the matriarch's eyes, there was no aggression, no threat. Instead, David saw something he had never encountered in a wild predator's gaze, not in 8 years of wildlife photography: recognition. And what he dared to believe was gratitude. The cub in David's arms let out a soft mewl, calling to its pride. The sound seemed to break the tense standoff, and what happened next was caught on David's waterproof action camera, which had been recording the entire incident automatically. A lioness stepped into the shallows. Her massive paws sent ripples across the water as she approached David. Every muscle in his body tensed in preparation for the attack that never came. Instead, the lioness stopped just 3 feet from him and did something that defied every law of predator behavior David had studied. She bowed her head, a gesture that could only be described as a nod. The moment lasted several seconds, during which the rest of the pride remained perfectly still, as if witnessing a ceremony of immense importance. When the matriarch lifted her head again, she looked David directly in the eyes. Not the threatening gaze of a predator sizing up its prey, but a focused, intense look of acknowledgement. Between equals, the cub in David's arms began to. As if responding to his words, the matriarch took another step forward. David's heart pounded against his ribs, but something in the lioness's demeanor told him he was not in danger. Her approach was cautious, deliberate, and completely non-threatening. What happened next would be studied by animal behavior specialists around the world for years to come. The matriarch carefully extended her massive head toward David, close enough for him to feel her warm breath on his face. For several moments, she simply studied him. Her intelligent amber eyes seemed to assess not just his physical presence, but something deeper: his intentions, his character, his role in saving her cub. Then she did something unprecedented in the recorded history of lion behavior. The matriarch began grooming David. Her coarse tongue brushed across his forehead, showing the same gentle care she would offer to members of her pride. There was no mistaking the gesture. She had temporarily accepted him as part of her family. David remained perfectly still, barely daring to breathe as this apex predator displayed a level of trust that contradicted everything he thought he knew about wild animals. The grooming lasted only 30 seconds, but the message was clear to every member of the pride. David was not a threat. He was not prey. He was the human who had risked his life to save one of their own. The matriarch began grooming David. Her coarse tongue brushed across his forehead, showing the same gentle care she would offer to members of her pride. There was no mistaking the gesture. She had temporarily accepted him as part of her family. David remained perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, as this apex predator displayed a level of trust that contradicted everything he thought he knew about wild animals. The grooming lasted only 30 seconds, but the message was clear to every member of the pride. David was not a threat. He was not prey. He was the human who had risked his life to save one of their own. The other lionesses began to approach, their body language more relaxed than aggressive. A massive male lion, who had kept a watchful distance, stepped down to the edge of the water and lay in a resting pose, making it clear he considered the situation peaceful. David cautiously began to move toward the shore, still carrying the cub. The pride parted, making way for him, their posture more like an honor guard than predators surrounding prey. When he reached the muddy bank, David slowly knelt and laid the cub down on solid ground. The reunion was instant and emotional. The mother lioness rushed to her offspring, sniffing him thoroughly, checking for injuries, and purring with relief. The other lionesses gathered around, each taking turns inspecting and smelling the rescued cub. Last to approach was the male lion. He lowered his massive head and gently touched the cub with his nose. David remained on his knees by the river, his clothes dripping with water, watching the unfolding of this intimate family moment. By all logic, he should have been terrified, surrounded by 6 of Africa's most dangerous predators. Instead, he felt honored, witnessing something few humans ever had: genuine emotional bonds within a lion pride. Dr. Sarah Mbeki, a wildlife biologist who later reviewed David's footage, was stunned. She explained that grooming behavior shown by a matriarch is typically reserved for pride members only. The fact that a wild lioness extended such a gesture toward a human suggested a level of cognitive recognition and gratitude that challenges our fundamental understanding of feline social intelligence. As the pride settled around their recovered cub, David slowly began to retreat, hoping to give them space and not intrude on this sacred family moment. But the lions had other plans. As David stepped back, the mother lioness turned from her cub and let out a sound he had never heard in 8 years of documenting African wildlife. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but a soft, rumbling call that felt almost like speech. The other lions immediately responded, rising to their feet and forming a line that took David's breath away. The lions arranged themselves in 2 parallel rows, creating a clear path from David's position to the acacia tree where his camera gear was stored. It was an escort formation, an honor guard protecting his safe passage from the river. "This is impossible," David whispered, his voice picked up by the waterproof microphone, still recording every moment. "They're escorting me out." The lead lioness took position to David's right. The massive male moved to his left, and the 4 other lionesses flanked them, keeping perfect spacing as they began a slow, ceremonial walk from the riverbank. David found himself in the center of this surreal procession, surrounded by more than 1,500 pounds of predator muscle, being treated not as prey, but as an honored guest. The rescued cub, now recovered enough to walk, trotted alongside his mother, occasionally glancing at David with curiosity rather than fear. Every few steps, the young lion brushed against David's leg, and the simple gesture of familiarity left him speechless. David's equipment lay forgotten as the pride halted. The matriarch approached him one last time, her massive head tilted slightly as she studied his face. Then, in a gesture that would be replayed millions of times on social media, she gently pressed her forehead to his. Lions use this same greeting behavior with trusted members of their pride. "Thank you," David whispered, not caring whether she understood. "Thank you for the trust." The matriarch stepped back and gave a soft huff, a sound of contentment and farewell. One by one, members of the pride approached David, some lightly touching his nose with theirs, others brushing against his legs. Even the massive male lion took part, nudging David's shoulder gently with his enormous head before moving on. David's equipment lay forgotten as the pride halted. The matriarch approached him one last time, her massive head tilted slightly as she studied his face. Then, in a gesture that would be replayed millions of times on social media, she gently pressed her forehead to his. Lions use this same greeting behavior with trusted members of their pride. "Thank you," David whispered, not caring whether she understood. "Thank you for the trust." The matriarch stepped back and gave a soft huff, a sound of contentment and farewell. One by one, members of the pride approached David, some lightly touching his nose with theirs, others brushing against his legs. Even the massive male lion took part, nudging David's shoulder gently with his enormous head before moving on. The rescued cub was the last to say goodbye. It sat right in front of David, lifted its tiny head, and gave a soft mewl, a sound uncannily like gratitude. David bent down and gently stroked the cub's head one final time. Both seemed to understand that this moment would never come again. As the pride turned and moved toward the distant trees for their midday rest, David stood alone by his gear, soaked through, overwhelmed by what had just taken place. His action camera had captured every second of the unprecedented encounter. Later, the footage's authenticity was confirmed by wildlife experts, analyzed by animal behaviorists, and broadcast in documentaries around the world. Dr. Jane Goodall herself called it one of the most remarkable demonstrations of interspecies communication and gratitude ever recorded. But for David, the technical analysis mattered far less than the profound truth he had experienced firsthand. In that muddy river, surrounded by wild lions that should have seen him as a threat, he had witnessed something science was only beginning to grasp: the capacity for sincere gratitude and recognition, even across species. The rescued cub grew up under the protection of its pride, and David continued his photography work in the Masai Mara. In the months that followed, he encountered the same pride multiple times. Each time, the matriarch greeted him with a soft tap, and the once rescued cub, now a grown lion, approached his vehicle without fear, sometimes lying in its shade. Local Maasai guides began calling David Simba's brother. The man accepted, if only briefly, into a lion's pride. Tour operators started offering David Thompson tours, hoping to recreate the magic of that meeting, though none came close to replicating the extraordinary trust and gratitude he had experienced. Dr. Becky later established the Thompson Mara Research Fund to study the cognitive and emotional abilities displayed by the pride during the rescue. David's experience proves that the boundary between human and animal consciousness is far blurrier than we ever imagined, she wrote in her groundbreaking paper. What we witnessed wasn't just animal behavior, it was a display of values we once believed uniquely human: gratitude, honor, and moral recognition. For David Thompson, who had simply hoped to photograph wildlife that day, the encounter became a life-changing reminder that compassion is a universal language, spoken, understood, and now finally being recognized by beings we are only just beginning to truly know.